тут вже на вході в центр. Ми розпочинаємо зараз прямо з теми 100 днів окупації Криму. Будемо говорити про те, як кримчани, які вимушено переселилися на материкову частину України, як вони почувають себе зараз, як вони інтегруються в соціальне життя, як вони, з якими проблемами вони стикаються і що потрібно зробити нам разом з вами, разом з урядом для того, щоб вирішити проблеми цих людей. І будемо говорити з вами з Анатолієм Засобою, координатором ініціативної групи «Кримська діаспора». В 13:00 у нас буде дуже цікава тема, яка близька всім, хто користується на сьогоднішній день інтернетом і мобільним зв'язком. Будемо говорити про технології впровадження 3G і 4G в Україні. Це те, що Україні так бракує, і це те, де ми відстаємо від решти країн світу, напевне, мінімум на декілька десятиліть. Нашими спікерами будуть Андрій Садовий, Андрій Логвін та Леонід Ошаров. Закінчимо сьогодні ж наш робочий день з розмовою з послом Великої Британії в Україні, паном Саймоном Смітом. І зараз я запрошую до слова нашого першого спікера. Вітайте.
So I give the floor to our first speaker, Anatoly Zasoba, who is the coordinator of the initiative group Crimean diaspora. Good afternoon, dear journalists. I'm sure that my colleagues from Crimea are here as well. We decided to hold a briefing today to tell you what has changed over the past 100 days since the so-called referendum that took place in Crimea, and we will talk about the influence of those processes on what's happening in Crimea and Sevastopol, and what has changed over 100 days in the attitude towards forced migrants on the territory of the continental Ukraine. So I'll remind you about what has happened and how has happened. When we came here, our main message was that on Maidan for 3 months there was a revolution, but in Crimea and Sevastopol for 3 weeks there was a special operation. Although until now some Crimeans do think that they have launched and conducted a revolution, and they have invited Mr. Putin to join Crimea to Russia, and that they became initiators of the events that took place there. But it's an open secret that what we are witnessing in Crimea and the East would not have happened if there was not an instigator of what has happened and is happening. So our deep conviction is that there's we cannot speak about any democratic will of people. This was a special operation to seize Crimea, although the medals issued by Mr. Putin are called for reunification of Crimea with the Russian Federation. But if we talk about the dates, we are paying attention to the fact that the medals are dated February the 20th. So officially Russia thinks that the reunification of Crimea with Russia started on the 20th of February, although we remember that everything started with Sevastopol, with this Nakhimov Square, where at a multi-thousand rally they elected the so-called People's Mayor of Sevastopol, Mr. Charlie, and this was on the 23rd of February. So there was a prehistory to the events that took place on the 23rd of February. Also, you may remember that the referendum was moved forward several times, and it was planned even to take place simultaneously with presidential elections, but finally it took place on the 16th of March. And before the referendum, it was practically unbearable to remain in Sevastopol. I am from this city. I and my family left Sevastopol on the 15th of March. We decided to go away 2 hours before the train left, And it was a wise decision because some of our colleagues who were in favor of territorial integrity of Ukraine, regrettably, those who haven't managed to leave before the referendum, they were pressurized. If you remember, there were materials about a Catholic priest who was interrogated. This was taking place after the referendum, and on the night on 16th March, there were several purges, and while at the beginning of the special operation, there were three main viewpoints: to join Russia, to retain autonomy, and to remain within the Ukraine. By the day of referendum, there was only one viewpoint which was supported. This was to join Russia, and on the 18th of March, Russia was talking already about annexation and joining of Crimea to Russia. And in the law of forced migrants, there was a date, 18th of March, the day of forced migration, but we do not recognize all this. We only recognize the fact of occupation, illegal and temporary occupation of Crimea by Russia. So we think that the key point and the turning point was on the 16th of March, the day of the referendum. The main problems that we have now in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. To wrap up the topic of Crimea, we are in constant contact with people who remained in Sevastopol and on the territory of Crimea, and we can see, let's say, positive changes in inverted commas, and people hoped for them. In the first turn, it's about pensioners and disabled people who get pensions from the Russian state. They have been really increased twofold and are being paid out in rubles. Also, people who work for state enterprises who get more than they used to. Also, military and law enforcers whom the Russia staked on. And we have some data that those military who have taken an oath of allegiance to Russian Federation, they've got their salaries augmented 5 or 4 times. This is all justified because we understand that Russia is sufficiently a police state, so they want to influence the mood of pensioners and those who are being paid from the state, by the state, and also law enforcers. The former were the fifth column, and the law enforcers will protect the interests of Russian state on the territory of Crimea. We also, but we only can speak in a positive way about the categories that I named. All the rest of the people have difficulties. I was a businessman in Sevastopol, and from my own experience, I can tell you that really the entrepreneurs, the hired workers with entrepreneurs were paid more than state workers. The situation now is different. For instance, a teacher at a state school and a teacher in a private school, the teachers from state schools started to receive more, which is due to the increase of financing from the state of Russia, and entrepreneurs and businessmen experience a lot of restrictions, so they have to cut salaries to their staff. I used to be a member of the Coordination Council at the State City Administration that was responsible for the support of entrepreneurship, so I know what is the percentage of entrepreneurs in Sevastopol. 1/3 of the city budget was formed due to the small and medium-sized business, and as far as the rate of entrepreneurs per 1,000 residents, Sevastopol was in the first place in Ukraine, sometimes ceding this position to Kiev. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs in Sevastopol, and they don't have an opportunity now to develop their business. And a lot of people have a problem with this, and also on the rest of the territory of Crimea, because it's an open secret that the tourist season has failed. And of course, those who used to sell alcohol have problems, because in Russia there are different laws, their own laws, and you saw how entrepreneurs in Sevastopol and Crimea were indignant about the policy of Russia in relation to entrepreneurship. And there's issue of licenses, for instance, the expiration of Ukrainian licenses, how to prolong them. And I can tell you for sure that for the business, the main thing is stability. And for stability, because of this special operation, because of the occupation, the Crimean business does not have this stability, which is urgent for, vital for the development. So we see the shrinking of business. Unemployment in Sevastopol reaches now 30%, which is unseen in our history, in the history of Sevastopol. Our family and our friends there do not have an opportunity to find jobs. Some of them are resigning, some of them are being dismissed, and the salaries that they are being offered are from 5 to 10,000 rubles. Divided by 3, and you'll get the hryvnia equivalent. And the prices have risen to twofold or threefold, and of course the communal tariffs as well. So we can tell that this is not a sufficient amount of money. You understand that the economic literacy of the population is not very good. So people in Sevastopol and Crimea do not calculate. At the moment, they see that they've got more money, but they do not see that there's a high increase of prices. And people actually can allow themselves less than they used to.
So it's about Crimean component. Also, there's the problem with water, which hasn't been resolved yet. And I believe that Crimean authorities will have to come to some agreement with Ukraine. For the state of Ukraine, that is additional argument and some issues of further interrelations with the peninsula. When we just arrived, we thought that the Ukrainian policy will be focused so that they will be showing how they take care about the patriots of Ukraine. But now we understand Ukraine that the policy is such on the territory of the Republic of Crimea. There are still some of the citizens of Ukraine left, and the patriots of Ukraine who want to stay in Ukraine, despite the fact that certain percentage of people moved to the continent. But there are many people who are still in Crimea, who are loyal to our country. Maybe they didn't have enough power to support the Ukrainian scenario. But I don't want to hear what people are saying here when people are saying that, well, you voted for that, you wanted that to happen, so you have it. I would like to request the colleagues, journalists, to correctly present the information. Of course, there were people who supported Russian scenario, and now they got what they wanted. But don't forget that there are citizens of Ukraine there, and our country has to take care of them. I believe that in the draft law on the free economic zone, which is being actively discussed, and there is some cooperation between Russia and Ukraine planned. There will be the situation that this will be certain cooperation, so that in Crimea the life is getting better. At least the economic situation maybe will be stabilized in Crimea, because this level of unemployment will not be helpful for people. Most of the people in Crimea live from the money that they earn during the summertime. Maybe they will somehow survive now, but in autumn and in winter they will feel difficulties because they will not have money that they hope to get. They were not working during the autumn and winter time because they usually were earning money in the summertime. Now I would like also to draw your attention to such a thing. There is such a notion as refugees. There are refugees. It isn't correctly to call us refugees. According to international terminology, we are IDPs, or according to the new law on forced migrants, we're called forced migrants. We were previously positioned as the IDPs, the citizens of Ukraine who within the territory of the country, and Crimea is still the territory of the country. We, without crossing the state border, we are still on the territory of the state, but we need the support and of the state. Talking about the citizens of the east of Ukraine who moved to Sevastopol, who moved to Crimea, they have the right to be called refugees because they have crossed Russian border. There is the problem of refugees there. We are not trying to hide this fact. There is a certain pro-Russian part of refugees from the east of Ukraine went to Russian Federation and to Crimea, to Sevastopol. In Sevastopol, there are 3,000 of such refugees from the east, quite a significant number. And they are now thinking about what to do with them, how to support them, how to take care of them, because these are our citizens of Ukraine. They do need support, and maybe they hope that it will be easier there during this period of anti-terrorist operation in the east. But I mentioned the level of unemployment. The local authorities in Crimea, in Sevastopol, cannot provide enough jobs to these refugees because the economic situation there is very difficult. And these people will probably not have any chance to get socially adapted and to get some employment. Talking about internally displaced people, those people from Crimea who left Crimea after occupation. The first week the law was considered unoccupied territories. Thank you all. You drafted it and we discussed it. That was the first thing that was important to do, to state the position of Ukraine. What do we believe this territory of Crimea is? It is considered to be occupied, and we support this position. Talking about legislative initiatives that were continued, and they are about IDPs. I believe one of the major initiatives which is of importance for us, and that is because the law on occupied territories does not say much about IDPs or forced migrants. It just says that our rights and freedoms are preserved, but the law on occupied territories was more about the life and the rights and freedoms on the occupied territory, and it was not about forced migrants. Even though such people as Mr. Senchenko and other MPs continue to submit some amendments to that law, and I mentioned Mr. Senchenko. He submits some amendments on forced resettlers or forced migrants, and about our right to have the education or higher education on special terms on the continental territory of Ukraine. So talking about the law which was submitted to the committee by the Committee of the Human Rights on the 18th, on the 19th, it was included into the agenda. On the 19th, it was voted for. That is the draft law 4998/1, and it talks about forced migrants, not just from Crimea and Sevastopol, but also from the regions where ATO is executed, where our right to be settled is guaranteed. Now this is a big problem, even though Kiev is probably the last place out of all those regions who successfully coped with the people who moved from Crimea. I mentioned at the previous press briefing that more than 1,000 people are registered in the Department of Social Policy as forced resettlers, and only 650 got accommodation. That is just 20% of those people who needed accommodation. But this is quite a small number. And in other regions, they were more successful with this internal migration.
As far as eastern regions are concerned, the number of resettlers from the east to other regions of Ukraine where there is no anti-terrorist operation, their number is bigger than the number of Crimeans, and of course the need in temporary settlement is even bigger. And in spite of the fact that we're talking about 100 days of Russian occupation of Crimea, I can tell you that we have become used to living without the law on forced migrants, but people from the east require this in order to safeguard their rights. We are witnessing a lot of discussions that this law does not satisfy a lot of public organizations, so there are initiatives that call upon the President of Ukraine to veto this law, although in many aspects this law is better than no law at all. It is better when you act timely, but maybe with a lower quality, than not to act at all. We understand the risk of the fact that another version of the law, if the president vetoes it, we can lose time and find ourselves in the situation when the parliament goes to vacation and we won't have any law at all. So we don't see anything too bad in signing this law, and then public initiatives can demand and offer amendments to this law. At least they have the terms that will start to work. Both state, central bodies of power will start to implement this law as soon as it will be signed and published. So it is important for us that we see this law enacted. We don't have much time, so let's switch to questions. Any questions, please? Kazakhstan opposition, Aydin Sadikov. We had an information that there are Chechen businessmen and Chechen bandits in Crimea who confiscate business and who snatch flats from Crimeans. Well, in Sevastopol, this is a special region, and I think that such cases are fewer in Sevastopol, but it is hard to expect anything else from a gangster who heads Crimean Peninsula now. The fish starts to rot from the head. When people decided to give their fates into the hands of the bandit who has the nickname of Goblin, it is hard to expect, and naive was to expect any other sort of behavior on the Crimean Peninsula, so I won't be surprised that there are such cases. We know very well that the number of people of other ethnic origin is increasing in Crimea, and yes, the bandit power can only act with bandit methods. So they do overtake different businesses, different construction sites that, for instance, belong to Ukrainian companies that remained in the continental part of Ukraine, so they are being overtaken by the new people. To continue this very question, there's information in social networks that there's a program of changing the ethnic composition of Crimea by involving as many people from Caucasus, Chechnya in particular, as possible, and they got very good rates for their mortgages, and there's a campaign in Russian Federation calling people to move to Crimea. Do you know about this program? I think that, it is not being displayed openly, this interest. This takes place as if by itself, and this takes place behind the scenes, and there is the understanding of this. The issue of the fifth column, I think that every person, at least a Crimean person, after having found themselves in this situation, have understood the real significance, meaning of this term, and the understanding of what the fifth column is. Russian authorities and Ukrainian authorities, to a great extent, this role play, because the roles were very precise. Who is the hero? Who is the traitor in the Crimean Peninsula? Ukraine is interested in retaining its fifth column, and Russia is interested in creating its fifth column, and of course to root out those who adhere to pro-Ukrainian positions. I can tell you that many people who at the beginning of this special operation were in favor of pro-Ukrainian scenario, or at least neutral, they dwindle in their numbers because pro-Ukrainian people are leaving the territory of Crimea, and the people who were in the neutral position, they are adapting. They accept the position that there is, and they recognize that Crimea is Russia now. They will not speak loudly because they are afraid. They understand the nature of the police state. It was very understandable from the very start that the tactics of Russian behavior would be the change of ethnic composition. There's nothing surprising in this, and Russia will move in this direction while Ukraine will try to preserve the quality and quantity composition of the population of Crimea. There are different understandings of what's going on in Crimea. I won't be surprised if there will be programs in Russia that will promote the change of the ethnic composition of the peninsula of Crimea. We have to to wrap up our briefing, and we will wait for you here to come here again. We are monitoring the fate of our compatriots who had to go to the continental part of Ukraine. Thank you very much. And